first 5 books of the Old Testament are known as the Torah, the Pentateuch, or the 5 books of Moses. Each of the books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are all comparable in length. The books themselves record 2,706 years of Israel's history. Ironically, roughly 1/3 of the Pentateuch is dedicated to the 1 year Israel spent at Sinai. When Israel is delivered from Egyptian bondage, the people wander for 3 weeks before coming to Mount Sinai. Exodus 19 records the Israelites encamped around the mountain. The remainder of the book has Israel at Sinai. This historical context of the book is also that of Leviticus. It is also not until Numbers 10, verse 12, that Israel embarks on its new journey away from Sinai. Thus, the covenant between God and Israel, as passed down at Sinai, is pivotal for understanding the theology of the Pentateuch and the larger Old Testament. As you begin your study of the Pentateuch, it will become apparent that Genesis is a book of origins, meaning it begins God's story in history. The book chronicles creation, human disobedience, and divine redemption. These 3 themes establish the foundation for the rest of the Old Testament, especially in the Pentateuch. The book also introduces the covenant, that is, the divine relationship between God and the forefathers of the Israelites. The narrative stories in Genesis are divided into 2 unequal sections: the primeval history, chapters 1 through 11, and the patriarchal history, chapters 12 through 50. The primeval history is proto-history and cannot be dated accurately. When reading these narratives, emphasis should be given to the questions of who, how, and what, instead of when. Thus, the emphasis of the well-known stories is more theological than historical. That is, the creation of the world, Adam and Eve, the fall of humanity, the first murder, and Noah's Ark. The patriarchal history, unlike the primeval history, can be roughly dated to the Middle Bronze period, dating from 2000 to 1550 BC. Genesis 12 through 50 is more concerned with God's relationship with the patriarchs, that is, the forefathers of Israel's faith, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. The patriarchal stories are best described as family history. Abraham is considered the father of Israelite faith. Isaac, Abraham's son, is the father of Jacob, the father of the Israelites. Thus, the primeval and patriarchal narratives are overtly theological with an indebtedness to Israel's history and ideology. The book of Exodus continues the storyline after the death of Joseph, albeit 400 years later. The title of the book is derived from the Israelites' departure from Egypt. However, the title does not adequately capture the contents of the book. The primary theme of the book is that God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is now the God of the nation of Israel, that is, Jacob's descendants. In short, the book of Exodus provides a link between the history of the patriarchs and the history of the people of Israel, which will be chronicled through most of the Old Testament. The story begins with God supernaturally rescuing the enslaved Israelites from Egyptian bondage with the aid of Moses. The miraculous rescue of the Israelites became known as the greatest salvific event of the Old Testament. Once on the run, the Israelites encountered God at Sinai, where the law was given and the covenant was established. Lastly, the earthly tabernacle was built for the worship of God. The worship of Yahweh, or God's proper name, is introduced in the patriarchal narratives. With the birth of Moses, however, a shift occurs when God manifests himself to Moses and the Israelites at Sinai. The laws that were given to Moses for the people of Israel function as a covenantal constitution. In subsequent books, especially Leviticus, the worship of God is given further emphasis. The book of Leviticus is concerned with the worship of God, and more specifically, with the concept of sacred. There are 3 aspects of sacred that take center stage in Israel's early history. There's sacred space, there's sacred status, and sacred time, all of which are paramount for worshiping God. The demand for holiness and worship are highlighted in Leviticus and other Pentateuchal books. To fortify the socio-religious foundation of the remaining history of Israel, we see that the erosion of the monotheistic relationship that was mandated by God is tested primarily by the polytheistic influences of the Egyptians and the inhabitants of the land in Canaan. The divine directive to purge the pagan influences of the Egyptians during Israel's wilderness wandering of 40 years and to future ratification of idolatries in the land of Canaan is an important theme of Numbers and Deuteronomy. The theme of abrogating idolatry continues in the historical books, Joshua to Kings. As a result of Israel's unwillingness to obey, they wander in the wilderness for 40 years. It's after this 40 years of tumultuous wandering, the Israelites find themselves in a unique position. They have wavered in their faith on several occasions. The wilderness journey represents the transition between the lack of faith and Israel's inhabitants of the land of Canaan. The Sinai covenant between God, Moses, and the Israelites emphasized obedience and monotheism. Unfortunately, the older generation of Israelites did not heed the words of God and became defiant against Moses and Aaron. As a result, the old generation slowly perished during the 40 years of wilderness wandering. The abhorrent sins of the old generations transgressed the Sinaitic covenant and resulted in a farewell address by Moses to the new generation of Israelites. Deuteronomy was this farewell address and demanded the renewal and restoration of the covenant between God and the Israelites. The renewal of the covenant coincides with the Israelites' entrance into the Promised Land, that is the book of Joshua. Together, Deuteronomy and Joshua connect God's covenantal promise at Sinai with the new generation of inhabitants in the land of Canaan.